in Baalbek, Lebanon, 1 hour's drive from the Syrian border, here in March 2015. And right now, we're approaching the quarry, or one of the two quarries, from which the giant stones, some 1,200 tons.
Imagine standing before a stone so massive that even modern engineering would falter. Now imagine it was carved, moved, and positioned thousands of years ago with a precision that rivals laser guidance, then abandoned without a single explanation. No records, no plans, just silence. This is Baalbek. For 2,000 years it has resisted scholars, challenged engineers, and unsettled empires. And in 2014, the mystery deepened when archaeologists uncovered something even more impossible. A 1,650-ton stone, the largest ever carved by human hands, still locked in the bedrock as if the builders simply walked away. Why create something so colossal and never finish the job? Because Baalbek may not be an isolated marvel. It may be part of a global pattern stretching from Turkey to Egypt, one that suggests these monuments were not built to celebrate power, but to communicate something urgent. And if that's true, the real question isn't how they were built, it's what they were trying to warn us about. The secret beneath Baalbek. Lebanon's Bekaa Valley unfolds like any rural landscape. Vineyards stretch toward distant mountains. Families sell fruit by dusty roadsides. Life moves at the rhythm of seasons and harvests. The region has been inhabited for over 10,000 years, making it one of the longest continuously occupied places on Earth. And then you round a corner, and Baalbek appears. Roman columns thrust toward the sky, 6 survivors standing like stone sentinels after 2,000 years of earthquakes, invasions, and weather. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 1984, recognizing it as one of the finest examples of imperial Roman architecture. Tourists photograph these columns. They marvel at the Temple of Jupiter. They walk the ancient streets imagining Roman legions. But most visitors miss what actually matters. It is not above ground, it is beneath. The foundation of this Roman temple sits on something far older. 3 stone blocks, arranged side by side, forming the base of a platform the Romans built upon but almost certainly did not create. The Greeks called them the trilithon, meaning 3 stones, and their dimensions are staggering. Each one stretches 19 meters long, stands 4.2 meters high, and runs 3.6 meters deep. Each one weighs between 750 and 800 tons. To put that in perspective, a fully loaded Boeing 747 weighs around 400 tons. These blocks are heavier than 2 jumbo jets combined. The largest stone in the Egyptian pyramids weighs 90 tons. The trilithon stones are nearly 9 times heavier, and they are not rough-hewn boulders stacked carelessly by ancient hands. They are precision-cut megaliths, fitted together with tolerances that modern engineers struggle to achieve. No mortar holds them. No gaps separate them. Stone meets stone in an embrace so tight it has survived earthquakes that toppled empires. The engineering that defies explanation. Here is where the mystery begins to sharpen. The largest mobile cranes operating today, the engineering marvels that lift bridge sections and oil platform components, can handle around 20,000 tons under ideal conditions. That is with hydraulic systems, computer guidance, steel cables rated to exact specifications, and teams of engineers calculating every force vector. Moving an 800-ton block horizontally across uneven ground, then lifting it onto a platform and positioning it with millimeter precision pushes the absolute limits of modern capability. Someone achieved this thousands of years ago, without engines, without computers, without steel, possibly without even the wheel as engineers understand it. The Romans were brilliant builders. Their aqueducts still carry water. Their roads still bear traffic. Their engineering innovations shaped Western civilization. But the largest stone blocks Romans are confirmed to have moved weigh around 50 tons. The trilithon stones are 16 times heavier. Nothing in Roman engineering records, nothing in their architectural traditions, even hints at the capability to handle something this massive. Half a kilometer from the temple platform lies the quarry where these giants were born. And here the mystery deepens into something stranger. 3 unfinished megaliths remain partially embedded in bedrock, frozen at various stages of extraction. The first, known locally as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, or Hajar el-Hibla, weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. Local legend says the name comes from a pregnant woman who tricked the people of Baalbek into believing she knew how to move the giant stone if only they would feed her until she gave birth. Other stories say pregnant jinn were assigned the task. Still others claim women who touch the stone experience increased fertility. Whatever the origin of its name, the stone has waited in that quarry for thousands of years, going nowhere. In the 1,990 seconds, archaeologists discovered a second monolith nearby, the Stone of the South, weighing 1,242 tons. But even these behemoths are not the true giants. In 2014, the German Archaeological Institute made a discovery that shocked the archaeological world. Buried beneath centuries of debris, right next to the stone of the pregnant woman, lay an even larger block. They named it the Forgotten Stone. Measuring 19.6 meters long, 6 meters wide, and 5.5 meters tall, it weighs approximately 1,650 tons. That is roughly the weight of the space shuttle at launch. Tool marks score its surface, preserved mid-cut like a sentence interrupted mid-word. Why did the work stop? The stones show no cracks, no flaws that would make them unusable. The quarry was not destroyed by earthquake or flood. Workers simply set down their tools one day and never returned. The blocks have waited ever since, abandoned for an operation that is now millennia overdue. If the builders successfully moved 3 800-ton stones into place with such precision, why could they not finish these larger blocks? What stopped them? What made an entire civilization walk away from work that clearly mattered deeply to them? Archaeologist Marguerite van Es from the German Archaeological Institute has stated that the transport of those stones to the temple is a reason why people admired this sanctuary even in ancient times. The trilithon was mentioned as a remarkable feature in ancient texts long before modern archaeology rediscovered its secrets. When the numbers stopped making sense, for centuries, the official explanation was simple. Romans built Baalbek. End of discussion. The Temple of Jupiter rose during the reign of Emperor Augustus around the 1st century BCE. Rome was at the height of its power, constructing monuments across the Mediterranean to demonstrate imperial might. Baalbek was one of their grandest statements, carved in stone at the empire's eastern edge. This narrative held because it was convenient. It fit existing frameworks. It did not require uncomfortable questions about what came before Rome. But some researchers noticed details that refused to align. The site has been examined by German and French archaeological expeditions since the 19th century, and research has continued into the 21st century. Yet the most fundamental question remains unanswered. How were the stones moved? By the mid-20th century, engineers started running their own calculations, independent of archaeological consensus. Their conclusions were deeply uncomfortable. The physics simply did not work. Moving an 800-ton stone with documented ancient technology requires forces that exceed what any known ancient system could generate. Wooden rollers, the most commonly proposed solution, would need to be massive to distribute the weight without splintering. Even assuming Lebanon's ancient cedar forests could provide such logs.
These majestic trees are the national icon of Lebanon, but up in the Lebanese mountains, the cedars are facing a new threat.
Moving the stone would require 30 to 40 rollers arranged in sequence. The friction alone means each meter of movement demands a pulling force equivalent to about 15% of the total weight. That is 120 tons of continuous force. To generate that force with rope, thousands of workers would need to pull in perfect synchronization. But rope itself becomes the problem. Hemp and flax, the strongest natural fibers available to ancient cultures, have tensile strength limits. A rope thick enough to handle even a fraction of the load would be so heavy that much of the pulling force gets wasted just dragging the rope itself. Some archaeologists have proposed that capstans, revolving cylinders with vertical axes, were attached to pulley blocks on both sides of the load. Evidence from a 9th century BCE Assyrian relief shows this method being used to move large objects. To move stones of the trilithon's magnitude, calculations suggest 32 men would be required to operate each machine, and 16 machines would be needed simultaneously. That means 512 workers developing the power of more than 10 tons each, all pulling in perfect coordination just to budge the stone. And that only addresses horizontal movement. The trilithon blocks sit 7 meters above ground level, elevated onto a foundation of smaller stones that themselves weigh around 350 tons each. Ramps create their own impossibilities. To achieve a manageable incline over even a modest vertical rise requires a ramp tens of meters long. A ramp sturdy enough to support 800 tons without collapsing would need thousands of cubic meters of fill material. Builders would move more earth constructing the ramp than the weight of the stone itself, and afterward would need to dismantle it without leaving any archaeological trace. One critical fact often overlooked is that the quarry sits slightly higher than the temple complex. This means no lifting was required for the initial transport, only the formidable task of controlling an 800-ton block moving downhill. The slightest miscalculation, the smallest loss of control, and the stone would have been unstoppable, crushing everything in its path. Ancient engineers somehow solved problems that would challenge modern construction firms. And then there was the alignment. Baalbek sits at exactly 34 degrees north latitude. The platform's orientation aligns with the rising sun at the spring equinox. This same type of astronomical precision appears at Giza, at Angkor Wat, at sites scattered across the globe built by cultures that supposedly never met, never communicated, never shared knowledge. Coincidence seemed increasingly inadequate as an explanation. The temple that rewrote history. 600 kilometers north of Baalbek, in the hills of southeastern Turkey, another impossible site was waiting to be discovered. In 1963, researchers from Istanbul and Chicago universities surveyed a hill called Göbekli Tepe.
Oregon State University archaeology teams have been carrying out expeditions in west-central Idaho for more than a decade.
They saw broken slabs of limestone scattered across the surface and assumed it was nothing more than an abandoned medieval cemetery. They moved on. For 3 decades, the hill kept its secret. Then, in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt read a brief mention of the stone-littered hilltop in the old survey reports. Something about the description caught his attention. He decided to see it for himself. From the moment he first saw Göbekli Tepe, Schmidt knew the place was extraordinary. Unlike the stark plateaus nearby, the hill had a gently rounded top that rose 50 feet above the surrounding landscape. The shape stood out. Only man could have created something like this, Schmidt later recalled saying. Within a minute of first seeing it, I knew I had 2 choices. Go away and tell nobody, or spend the rest of my life working here. What he uncovered would fundamentally challenge our understanding of human civilization. Buried beneath the hill were massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circles, some standing 16 feet tall and weighing between 7 and 50 tons. The pillars were elaborately carved with foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, and snakes twisting across their broad surfaces. Some bore stylized human features, arms carved along their sides, hands meeting at their bellies. Schmidt believed they represented human beings, that they once stood on the hillside like a meeting of stone beings. Radiocarbon dating delivered the real shock. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BCE. That makes it more than 11,000 years old. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by 7,000 years. It predates the walls of Jericho, previously believed to be the oldest monumental structures on Earth, by at least 1,000 years. It predates pottery, domesticated animals, and according to conventional archaeology, agriculture itself. This discovery upended everything scholars thought they knew about the origins of civilization. The conventional wisdom held that agriculture came first. Farming created food surpluses. Surpluses freed people from constant survival, allowing them to organize, specialize, and eventually build monuments. Göbekli Tepe reversed this sequence entirely. Here was monumental architecture built by hunter-gatherers, people who had not yet domesticated plants or animals, people who supposedly spent all their time following game and foraging for food. Schmidt estimated that at least 500 people would have been required to hew the massive pillars from local quarries, transport them, and erect them in precise configurations. Feeding that many workers would have required organization, planning, and food production capabilities that hunter-gatherers were not supposed to possess. Schmidt called it the Rome of the Ice Age. He believed that Göbekli Tepe was not a result of civilization, but a catalyst for it. The need to feed the workers who built and maintained the sanctuary may have driven the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. Religion came first. Farming followed. Klaus Schmidt dedicated the rest of his life to excavating Göbekli Tepe. He died of a heart attack in July 2014, just 4 years before his greatest dream came true. In 2018, Göbekli Tepe was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Since then, more than 2 million visitors have walked among the pillars he unearthed. A pattern written across the earth. If Baalbek and Göbekli Tepe were isolated anomalies, they could remain fascinating mysteries, one-off enigmas that defied explanation. But they are not alone. Across the globe, at sites separated by oceans, built by cultures that supposedly never met, never traded, never shared a single word, the same patterns appear. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Puma Punku in Bolivia, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, Stonehenge in England, the Karnak stones in France, sites featuring precision stonework, astronomical alignments, and engineering capabilities that seem to exceed what should have been possible for their time. At Giza, another controversy has simmered for decades. In 1990, geologist Robert Schoch traveled to Egypt with researcher John Anthony West to examine the Great Sphinx from a geological perspective. What he found challenged the conventional dating that places the Sphinx's construction around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. Schoch observed deep erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx and on the walls of the enclosure surrounding it. The weathering showed a rolling, undulating vertical profile with deep fissures, characteristics consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. The problem is that the Sphinx sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert. The region has been arid for at least 5,000 years. Other structures on the Giza Plateau, structures securely dated to the Old Kingdom, show only wind and sand erosion, which produces a distinctly different pattern, sharp and ragged rather than smooth and undulating. Schoch concluded that the core body of the Sphinx must date back to an earlier period when the climate was wetter, at least 5,000 BCE and possibly as far back as 10,000 BCE, the end of the last ice age. Seismic studies conducted around the base of the Sphinx supported this conclusion, revealing extraordinary depths of subsurface weathering. The hypothesis remains controversial, rejected by mainstream Egyptologists who point to the lack of archaeological evidence for any civilization capable of carving the Sphinx before the Old Kingdom. But Schoch's geological observations have never been fully explained by the conventional timeline. Something happened around 12,800 years ago that changed everything. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt climate reversal that lasted approximately 1,300 years. The Earth had been warming steadily as the last ice age retreated. Then, suddenly temperatures plummeted. Greenland ice core data shows that central Greenland became nearly 14 degrees Celsius colder than it is today. The onset took less than 100 years, possibly just decades. Ecosystems that had been recovering were thrust back into near-glacial conditions. The cause remains debated. The scientific consensus points to a disruption of ocean circulation patterns, possibly triggered by massive freshwater floods from melting glaciers. But a more controversial hypothesis suggests a cosmic impact, a comet or asteroid fragment that struck or exploded over North America, triggering widespread wildfires and the extinction of megafauna like mammoths and mastodons. Evidence includes elevated platinum concentrations in ice cores from Greenland and sediment layers across 4 continents, as well as signs of massive burning events at precisely this time. The Younger Dryas coincides with the disappearance of the Clovis culture in North America and significant population disruptions across multiple regions. Here is what haunts researchers who study these timelines. Göbekli Tepe was built right at the end of the Younger Dryas, around 9,600 BCE, just as the climate was finally warming again after 1,300 years of cold. The site was used for roughly 1,500 years before being deliberately buried under tons of fill and abandoned around 8,000 BCE. The builders did not just walk away, they intentionally preserved it, filling in each enclosure with debris and soil before moving on. Other enclosures were built on top of the backfill, creating the man-made mound that hid the site for millennia. Why bury a temple complex that took generations to build? What were they trying to preserve or hide? The Younger Dryas also coincides with the period when Schoch believes the Sphinx may have been carved. If a sophisticated civilization existed during or before this climate catastrophe, the disaster could explain why no conventional archaeological evidence of them survives. Coastal settlements would have been destroyed by sea level rises of over 100 meters as the ice sheets finally collapsed. River valley civilizations would have been devastated by floods and ecosystem collapse. The survivors would have scattered, their knowledge fragmenting and fading over generations. What the silence is trying to tell us: if ancient builders possessed technology to move 800-ton stones with precision rivaling modern machinery, where did it go? Technologies do not simply vanish, they leave traces. Broken tools get tossed in dumps. Techniques get written down, taught to apprentices, improved over generations. Yet at Baalbek, the quarry went silent mid-project, and no culture in the region ever demonstrated anything close to that capability again. At Göbekli Tepe, the builders achieved feats supposedly impossible for hunter-gatherers, then deliberately buried their work and disappeared from history. The knowledge did not gradually fade, it disappeared. Some researchers propose that the technology was never as advanced as the monuments suggest. Perhaps ancient peoples simply had more time, more labor, and more patience than we give them credit for. Generations working on a single project, accumulating small improvements over centuries, might accomplish what seems impossible in a single lifetime. This explanation satisfies some scholars but leaves others unconvinced. It does not explain the precision. It does not explain why the techniques were never documented. It does not explain why no intermediate stages of development have been found. But there is a darker interpretation that the timeline suggests. What if the technology was not lost through disaster but abandoned by choice? What if the builders realized they had reached a threshold, a point where pushing further came at too high a cost? Resource depletion, environmental degradation, social structures strained to breaking just to organize such massive projects. Maybe the unfinished stones at Baalbek do not represent failure. Maybe they represent a decision. A civilization that looked at what it had built, looked at what it was becoming, and chose to stop. Consider the pattern. Göbekli Tepe was built at the end of an extinction-level climate event. The great monuments of Egypt rose during a period of unusual climate stability that would later give way to droughts that contributed to civilizational collapse. The Maya built their greatest pyramids just before their cities were abandoned.
The Great Pyramid of Khufu here at Giza is the culmination of hundreds of years of trial and error in pyramid building.
Rome expanded Baalbek during a climate optimum that preceded centuries of instability. Every time humanity built monuments on a massive scale, collapse followed, not during the building, after, as if the megaliths were final statements, last testaments carved by civilizations sensing their own ending. Today, Baalbek exists in suspended reality. The Roman temples still stand, barely, after 2,000 years of earthquakes, wars, and weather. Conservationists work year-round stabilizing columns, reinforcing structures, preventing further collapse. Lebanon itself is fragile. The economy has collapsed multiple times in recent years. Electricity comes and goes. Political deadlock is routine. The Baalbek International Festival, which once drew performers from around the world to perform among the ancient columns, was cancelled in 2006 due to war, and has faced repeated disruptions since. Yet the people who care for Baalbek keep showing up. They measure, they document, they guide occasional tourists through ruins that have outlasted every government, every conflict, every crisis the Bekaa Valley has endured. One local guide, whose family has lived near the site for 6 generations, speaks about the stones with a mixture of pride and resignation. His great-grandfather told him stories passed down from his own great-grandfather, always the same core truth. The stones were here before Rome, before Christ, before anyone could remember. We do not know who built them, he says, standing in the shadow of the trilithon. But we know they will be here after we are gone. There is weight to that statement, an acceptance. The stones do not belong to Lebanon or to Rome or to any empire. They belong to time itself. Archaeologists working at Baalbek talk about the site differently than they talk about other ancient structures. There is no excitement in their voices, no pride of discovery. Instead, there is something closer to unease. One German researcher described it as working inside a question we are not sure we want answered. Meanwhile, life continues around the ruins with surreal normalcy. Children play near the platform. Families picnic in the shadow of stones that weigh more than commercial aircraft. Perhaps that is the only sane response. Standing in perpetual awe would be exhausting. So the stones become part of the landscape, their impossibility absorbed into daily routine. Baalbek has outlived empires, earthquakes, and wars. It will outlive us too. The stones do not care about theories or timelines. They do not validate or disprove anyone's thesis. They simply wait, as they have waited for millennia, for someone to ask the right questions. And perhaps the right question was never how, or even who. Perhaps it was always why. Why build something so massive it defies explanation? Why push human capability to its absolute limit? Why leave it unfinished, abandoned, silent? The German Archaeological Institute continues its research. New technologies offer new ways of seeing. Perhaps someday we will understand how the stones were moved, but that answer might only lead us to harder questions about who we were, about what we forgot, and about whether the pattern that connects Baalbek to Göbekli Tepe to Giza is not just a coincidence of ambition, but a message we keep failing to read. If this journey through Baalbek's mysteries changed how you see ancient history, consider subscribing. We explore the questions that textbooks avoid and the evidence that challenges everything we think we know. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think stopped the builders? What are these stones really trying to tell us? Until next time, keep questioning.